All right, we live. All right, it's show planning night, so this is a chill stream. Um, really. Oh, am I not live yet? Looks like you're ready. Click here. I think we're already live. Are we live? I think we're live. I had two tabs open. Um, not not gonna be a packed show tomorrow. Um, so the plan is when I get off of work tomorrow morning, I usually come home, finish up putting the Monday night show together, and then go to sleep for like 6 hours and wake up and do the Monday night show and then the Monday night after party. I'm just going to stay up. I'm going to get home. I'm going to finish putting the show together. I'm going to go get my hair cut. I'm going to run down to the liquor store to get some Jameson for election day. I'm going to run to the tobacco store and get a cigar. Um, and then during all that, I'm going to drop off my mail in ballot at a ballot box. And then I'm going to come home and I'm going to stay up. And then at 6 o'clock, I'm going to start the Monday night show as usual. Stream from 6 to 9 or 10, doing the Monday night show. And then when I finish the stream, I'm going to go straight to bed because I will have been awake for like 24 hours at that point. um, or like 26 hours. So that's doing two things. That's prepping me to stay up for 24 hours, and uh, I get my sleep at night. It'll make it easier for me to fall asleep at nighttime. So that's what I'm gonna do, and then I'm gonna wake up Tuesday at like 10 a.m. and I'm gonna run down and vote in person, and then I'm gonna come back here and I'm gonna start the stream by noon for the 24-hour election stream. So that's the plan. I need to buy some pizzas. I need to buy some Jameson. I'm gonna have a cigar. Whether it goes good or bad, we're gonna smoke a cigar, a little celebration cigar, regardless of how it goes. But so I do still need to prep the Monday night show. What am I looking for? But while I do that, we're gonna watch this. I've already watched this. Um, oh, my audio's not right. Um, this is Richard Dawkins. It is Richard Dawkins, right? Not Charles Dawkins is dead. Um, boring, boring. Your life is boring. I've already watched this. It's kind of a rerun of Alex versus Jordan. It's very similar to the Alex O'Connor versus Jordan Peterson, but with Dawkins instead, which I think Alex is way more uh, entertaining and easier to watch than Dawkins. Time change was weird, huh?
Is something like the instinct, and that would be motivation or emotional drive. And then there's a
Well, we have no audio.
manifestation of
Where's my
that in
audio?
imagination and behavior. And it's more culturally constructed there. Then you could also imagine that there are depths of these ideas. The baseball hat idea, for example, that would be something that's manifesting itself at a fairly shallow level. But there's a reason that the backwards baseball hat caught on. It speaks of the moment for whatever.
All right. We'll skip the intro. We're going to play it at 1.25. And let's listen to this. I gotta grab some news and stuff.
The virus of the mind. So it's something that spreads because it spreads because it spreads. It's something that spreads.
So beginning by talking about memes and archetypes. A lot of people don't know this.
YouTube ads, you need this Chrome extension. I feel like I just found a Google.
A lot of people don't know this, but the term meme is from Richard Dawkins. It's not referring to the jokes that you see on the internet.
I think
the word meme has a deeper meaning than that, but it is kind of like the jokes we see on the internet.
Our first point of contact, in the spirit of finding those overlapping circles of interest between you two, will be the similarities, if there are any, between the concept of a meme and the concept of an archetype. So, Professor Dawkins, perhaps you can begin by telling us, what is a meme?
A meme is a virus of the mind. So it's something that spreads because it spreads because it spreads. It's something that spreads by imitation. As I understand it, an archetype is quite different from that, because an archetype is something which all humans have as a virtue of being human, something that's built in. So it's not something that spreads as an epidemic. It's something that we all have anyway. And I suppose that it could turn into a meme, but I would think it would be muddying the waters to even say that there's something very much in common between an archetype and a meme.
Memes are not embedded into the psychology of people as
no, they arise. They're things like the backwards baseball hat, which is not an archetype. I mean, it's something that becomes fashionable and spreads as an epidemic around the population, which is very different from an archetype, which is sort of built in.
Yes, I've heard you in the past, Dr. Peterson, say that a meme is very similar, if not almost identical to an archetype, almost as if you kept pushing the idea of what a meme is, you might end up with an archetype. But
well, I think maybe the appropriate way of tying the two ideas together, given what Dr. Dawkins just said.
So Alex is an atheist. He's more on Dawkins' side, and he will kind of show that throughout this. He'll even bring up some of the things between his interaction with Jordan Peterson when they had their one-on-one interview. He'll bring some of those into this conversation, and then Dawkins will kind of build off of Alex's ideas. I don't think Dawkins is that clever.
Is to notice the fact that something spreads because it catches, right? And so things catch because they have an emotional resonance, and so they attract people's interest, and so they attract them in an exploratory manner. That'd be one way of thinking about it. That would be attraction on the positive emotion side, or they attract them on the negative emotion side. And so that would loop the idea of the catchiness of an idea, a meme, let's say, with the more underlying motivational structures. And as the idea is more related to the action of underlying biological motivational structures, it becomes more and more expression of something that's instinctual and archetypal. Like Jung defined an archetype essentially as something like the manifestation of an instinct in image and then also in behavior. So the deepest level is something like the instinct, and that would be motivation or emotional drive. And then there's a manifestation of that in imagination and behavior, and it's more culturally constructed there. Then you could also imagine that there are depths of these ideas. The baseball hat idea, for example, that would be something that's manifesting itself at a fairly shallow level. But there's a reason that the backwards baseball hat caught on. You know, it speaks of the moment for whatever reason, and it's linked to the biology through the fact that it captures interest for some reason.
So perhaps something like
building your online
the archetype being a more fundamental psychological concept that memes can then play upon. The backwards cat catches on.
Well, that seems implausible to me, but the idea that the archetype could be a reason why some memes spread, that seems to me to be plausible if you believe in archetypes at all. Yeah.
But you prefer to think of memes, or you do think of memes as, you refer to them as a virus.
Yes,
it doesn't have to have a negative
connotation. It's the spreadability which is the salient point. And if chiming in with an archetype is a reason why they might spread, then I could go with that.
Yeah, and presumably archetypes don't act in the same way. They don't spread through cultures. They don't sort of grow up and die in individual generations. They're much more foundational than that.
I think you have to think about it hierarchically. You know, that there's something in the structure that would make itself manifest as an archetype. There's something that's foundational and deep that wouldn't change any faster in a sense than the species itself changes. But then there would be efflorescences of that idea. Guys, if you have ever seen these show prep streams, I usually don't talk a lot because I'm doing a bunch of stuff right now. I gotta be sitting at my computer doing this. So I figured I'll play something and we can watch it and listen to it. Boost our brain power a little bit. That would be less permanent as they were more attuned to the specifics of the time. So, and that's not saying anything different really than saying that there are ideas that make themselves manifest at different levels of depth. Oh, and I waited too long. It's too short of notice, but I've been sending some people some messages
asking if they will join in the 24-hour election stream. Just come by for like a guest appearance. Um, I've had one response back. I'm not going to say who it is because it was short notice, and if something comes up and he can't come on, um, I'm not going to be mad at him, and I'm not even going to say, I'm not even going to hint at it because I'm not, you know, I'm not real sure about it. But one person I messaged and said, "Hey, I'm doing a 24-hour election stream. I'm a big fan, small streamer. Would you maybe be able to stop by and say what up during the stream?" He responded in like 10 minutes. He said, "Yeah, we can do something." And I'm not going to say who it is because I'm not 100% sure if it's even going to happen. But it was cool that he got back to me so quick. I'm not a good networker, which is one of my, when I'm doing this sort of thing, is probably my biggest flaw, is that I'm not a networker. I'm not a people person, you know. And so this is the first time I've ever like gone out and like tried to message people and DM people and get some people to come on. And we'll see if anything comes of it. But it should be interesting.
Which is also a complex thing. Like it's not that easy to specify what makes an idea deep, which makes it more archetypal, and what makes it transient and trivial. There's a relationship between such ideas. There's no idea so trivial that it doesn't touch the depths because no one would care about it, right? So, but archetypal ideas do have that capacity to spread virally and to rise and fall. You see that, I think you see that in the history of religious ideas. You know, that religious ideas can be very catching because otherwise they wouldn't spread. Now, they do. There's variation in them like there is in languages, but there's also something that's core that makes them identifiable, let's say, as religious ideas rather than as any other sort of idea. I mean, one of the things I was really interested about, I sent you an email at one time asking you if you had read Mircea Eliade, especially The Sacred and the Profane, but he also has a 3-book series called A History of Religious Ideas. And I really like A History of Religious Ideas. It's a great book. And one of the things it does is analyze a particular widespread religious motif, which is the battle between the gods in heaven. You see this idea in many, many cultures. And each god is the expression of a mode of perception or a mode of being. And what you see happening in a multitude of cultures is that there are many, many ways of seeing the world and acting in it that are metamorphized into something divine. And as cultures mingle and mix, their gods compete in the space of the imagination, and something like a hierarchy forms. That's the emergence of something like monotheism. And the associate.
So we've been talking a little bit about the concept of a meme. I think it would be strange to be suspicious of the idea that memes are a thing that do exist and transmit, but there might be more room for suspicion about this concept of the archetype. I was wondering, Professor Dawkins, what you think about the concept of archetypes in general.
Well, for example, if we take the idea of the gods competing with each other, that I take it is a proper archetype because it's present in all cultures. I presume you mean is something that's built in genetically, ultimately, I suppose, that something about our brains makes different cultures invent the same kinds of religious symbols.
Yes.
Things like a battle between gods is one.
That's one.
And there might be others. It's not that convincing. I mean, it's such an obvious thing because we have human battles, and therefore an idea of battles between gods would not be that implausible. So it doesn't strike me as a very penetrating observation.
Well, I think the thing that's interesting about it, the thing that's been interesting to me about it is to start to understand the nature of the universal themes and how they're expressed in stories. I mean, one of the things I wanted to explore with you, because I think this is an idea that's at the core of the cultural conflict, is the postmodern types seem to have stumbled onto something which I actually think is true. And they're not the only discipline that's come to this realization, because you can see it emerging in neuroscience and in AI and in robotics as well, that we see the world of facts through something that when described as a story, because we have to prioritize our perceptions. We have to prioritize facts. And as far as I can tell, a story is a verbal account of how our perceptions and the facts that we encounter are prioritized. So for example, when you go see a movie, the movie has a hero, and what the writers do is they show you how the hero prioritizes his perceptions, what he attends to and how he acts, and you derive from that the story of his life and his ethic. And the idea that we have a story, that we have to organize our perceptions in priority, and that the description of that organization is a story, that's a very revolutionary idea. And I think the postmodernists got that right. And I think that's why we have a culture war going on, at least in part, is because the idea that we see the world through a story, or that a story is a description of the structure through which we see the world, I think that's accurate, because we have to prioritize our perceptions.
So,
And
Professor Dawkins,
that's a tricky problem.
Well, I would prioritize my perceptions like this. The fact that I care about are the facts that are true and have evidence going for them. I'm not that interested in symbols. I think, Dr. Peterson, you're drunk on symbols.
Yes,
You're
you mentioned.
only
I've heard that comment.
what we
Yeah.
can
Yes.
examine and what we can
I mean,
touch.
for
but
example,
but he'll appeal to the metaphysical whenever it suits him. Whenever he can't explain something through experiment, he's going to appeal to he'll appeal to the metaphysical.
I counted up in your book, We Who Wrestle with God, the number of references to Cain.
Mm-hmm.
There are
You're obsessed with
356
Cain.
references to Cain in the book, and 20 references to the descendants of Cain. You're obsessed with Cain because Cain is symbolic of evil. All the evil in the world, you more or less blame Cain for. And this is Cain. I mean, you don't believe Cain actually existed, I presume.
Bro, that's deep.
Since
fake
I joined
Joe
forces
Biden.
with the Daily Wire
That's deep fake Joe Biden.
Plus, you're destined to help you straight through all of your and finally joined to advance that Cain has, well,
Do you believe Cain existed?
well, I think of Cain as, well,
Do you believe Cain existed?
I think the pattern that Cain represents is an eternal pattern. And so
yes.
it's
Oh, I thought you were calling me daddy. You said, hi, daddy. Hey, Josh. Hi, daddy. You're talking to Daddy Jub. Dang it.
a
That's
higher
different.
level of existence.
That's different. I realize
well, there
that.
are Cain types who exist, and there
Yeah,
could well be
there are Cain types.
Yeah.
But Cain himself, I mean, you give the game away where you say in your book, Cain and Abel were the first humans to be born in the natural way. Now that
Now, here's where Jordan won't just go hard and just say, yes, Cain and Abel. He hints at it. He almost gets there. He says, well, there could have been two brothers that the story was based on. And then over time, the story becomes more real. It becomes hyper real because we see the archetype throughout history. But he won't just concede and say, yes, it's based on real people. He does. And then he kind of backs off of it because he doesn't want his, I think what, Jim Bob said, he's riding two horses. He's riding the horse of science and the horse of the metaphysical or the spiritual world. And he'll use their words when it suits them. When he's talking to people like Dawkins, he'll use words like evolution and scientific words. When he's talking to Christians or more based people, he'll use words like spiritual.
betrays you as it were pretending you think they really existed, because you wouldn't have said they were born in a natural way unless you were muddling up facts
I don't
with
know.
symbols.
He's always
there.
mad.
And you don't think that
He's an angry little man, Amanda. He's an angry little man.
Cain and Abel existed.
well, I don't. What do I think about Cain and Abel? I said I think the pattern that they represent always exists. Always exists.
You understand that that's a different thing.
Quite a
Exists
different
now.
matter. A pattern that they represent, the conflict between brothers, the rivalry
Yeah.
between brothers. This is a fundamental pattern, which yes, it's something that's there. But I care about
The Trump
facts. Well,
garbage
did they exist
truck.
or did they not exist?
Well, I can imagine a situation where when the story
Epic.
was originated, that it referred to two actual brothers. But as the stories propagate across time, as they mutate, as they adapt, let's say, to the structure of human memory, they deepen and they become broader. And so then they become emblematic not only of the pattern of conflict that might characterize the original two brothers that the story was about, but
There it
about the
goes.
conflict between
Let's see, there could have been two brothers. The story becomes more real. But then later Dawkins really tries to push him on this. And he won't just say, yes, I believe they were real people. But he did kind of just hint at it. He says, well, it could have been based off of two brothers. But he won't just stand on it.
brothers as such, and then the more fundamental levels of conflict that exist within human beings, which is what you see in more sophisticated literature.
Yeah, Dean, you were in the chat when I did a whole hour-long thing about why we need daylight savings time a year ago when this happened. So go back and find that stream, even though you were here when I talked about it. Go watch that stream, Dean. Look for the date right around this time.
It's like the biblical accounts speak of fact in a factual manner upon occasion, but the biblical
You might have to go to my videos or you might have to go to Rumble, but you can find it.
accounts also speak poetically and metaphorically and allegorically, and people who are sophisticated in biblical analysis have known this for centuries. The biblical literalists generally suffer from the problem that they don't even know what it means to be literalist. There's lots of unsophisticated ways of approaching a text.
Okay, let's see what Professor Dawkins thinks about that.
Well, I suppose I'm a literalist. I mean, and you give the game away when you say Cain and Abel were the first humans to be born in a natural way.
Well, I'm speaking allegorically there within the confines of the text. I mean, what I meant by that was that the way the story lays itself out is that Adam and Eve are created by God, and so they're not emblematic of the pattern of human beings that exist in fallen history within the confines of the text. The first two people who are genuine, who aren't creations of the divine, are Cain and Abel, and so for me, they're emblematic of the patterns of conflict that rip people apart in the world of history, in the world of normal history.
Professor Dawkins, I know you take particular umbrage with that statement that Cain and Abel were the first normally born human beings, but I think if I understand Dr. Peterson correctly, there are things that can be sort of true within a story. It's true that Sherlock Holmes lives at 221B Baker Street, and as far as I understand, that's maybe what you mean by the truth in the matter of Cain and Abel being the first naturally born humans. It's internal to the story.
Well, in the context of the story, they're the first two spirits or patterns you could think of, patterns of perception and action,
yes,
that characterize human existence in the fallen world, right? So they're emblematic of what happens in history outside of the whatever is meant by the pre-existent paradise.
But at the same time,
we're going to talk about mini brains tomorrow. Mini brains. And no, I'm not talking about dumb people. I'm talking about they're producing miniature brains now. Like organic. I don't know. I haven't even read all about it yet, but we're going to find out about it tomorrow.
You must know, I know this comes up all of the time, and somebody says, but did Cain and Abel really exist? And I know that you want to say that the story which
I think it's a silly question. I think it's like asking whether Raskolnikov existed in Crime and Punishment. Like it's not a trivial question, because you can answer yes and you can answer no. You can say, well, there was no such specific person as Raskolnikov.
But it was all the people.
It's not a helpful question, because the reason that...
See, this is just a repeat of Alex O'Connor versus Jordan Peterson. It's just the same thing, same line of questions again. Do you actually believe that happened? Because Jordan's a science-brained guy and an intellectual, and they can't possibly believe that an intellectual would believe this crazy fantasy mythology that has existed throughout all of time in every culture, in every individual. We see the parallels. They just can't possibly believe that these stories could have been actually based on real people.
Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment is a masterpiece is because Raskolnikov was everywhere in Russia when Dostoevsky wrote Crime and Punishment. And so Raskolnikov is hyper-real, not real.
But to be clear, is that how you feel about Cain and Abel? That is to say, an identifiable
hyper-real
Homo sapiens called Cain,
it's irrelevant. Who murders his brother. In a sense, it's irrelevant to me, because even if they were real, like, we don't know anything about them as historical figures.
Of course, even if they weren't real, of course they weren't real.
Well, like I said, it could have been the case that when the story originated, way back when it originated, that the first people that were described by the first person who generated the seeds of the Cain and Abel story were referring to actual people. But it doesn't matter, because the text is being compressed and modified over a vast span of time, and it's created all sorts of meanings that certainly weren't part and parcel of whatever the original story was.
Let's take the point Alex was making. Within the confines of the story, Dostoevsky was a great writer. What makes you think the writers of Genesis were a great writer? I mean, who were they? We know nothing about them.
Well, I think they were great writers, because I think I understand the patterning of the stories and what it points to. I think the idea, for example, that Cain and Abel are emblematic of two opposed patterns of adaptation to the world is brilliant. It's almost brilliant beyond imagining, especially because the story is so insanely compressed. And it's certainly evident to me as a clinician that the patterns that are portrayed in the story of Cain and Abel play themselves out in the real world continually and terribly, terribly.
You think the author of that story in Genesis was a literary genius?
Yeah.
I think that there's a spirit of literary genius at work across...
Especially for their time. And the fact that they wrote these stories that affected Shakespeare, they affected the stories in the Bible. Like, there aren't that many original story ideas anymore. You know, I think we were talking about this in a stream the other day, or somebody was, but, you know, Romeo and Juliet, the hero's journey, all these tropes in fictional writings, a lot of them have their origin in the Bible. you know, Shakespeare, Hamlet, the king, the battles, like a lot of these fictional stories that we get have origins in the Bible. So yes, these were literary geniuses for their time.
Us millennia crafting that story so that it has almost an infinite depth. How that relates to the original author or sequential authors, I don't know, because it's lost in the seeds of time. It's lost in history.
So the story evolved. You're saying it's the story
like a meme.
Yes, well, that's interesting.
It evolved to match the contours of the human memory. That's exactly it. Is that these stories? That's part of their archetypal nature. Like, so they have a emotional and motivational expression, but as they propagate across time, they also evolve. So they're maximally memorable. And they're maximally memorable for a biological reason.
Well, that's very interesting. If they really did evolve over time, if you could actually trace successive manuscripts, you can't do that. I mean, there's presumably a couple of Hebrew manuscripts and a Greek one. And I mean, what do you mean when you say it evolved?
Well, I would say you can see that in the compilation of the biblical texts, because one of the things that you see evolve, you know, and you criticized the biblical text at one point. Correct me if I've got this wrong, because I don't want to get this wrong. You said that there isn't anything in the biblical text that constitutes, let's say, significant original discovery, which is something that you'd expect if it was of divine providence, let's say, divine providence. And so, and I think, you know, I was thinking about that objection, and I think that one of the discoveries that the text lays bare in an insanely brilliant manner is that the foundation of the community is sacrifice, that's an appropriate conceptualization. And you can see the concept of sacrifice evolve across the biblical texts as they're sequenced chronologically in the overall story that makes up the biblical text. The idea of sacrifice becomes more and more sophisticated. It's more and more elaborated. It's more and more specified. It's more and more embodied. There's an obvious progression in ideas.
The progression, where do you see that progression? In successive manuscripts, or
in the successive stories as the text progresses, the way a novel progresses.
So something like sacrifice in the Old Testament, sacrifice in the Old Testament.
No, through the entire,
all the way through
the
to the New Testament.
Text is a sacrificial story as well. The Passion story is a story of sacrifice.
It is
and
indeed.
the sacrificial motif recurs continually through the biblical text, and it's elaborated constantly. And
okay, so the criticism is the Bible as a text gives us nothing to indicate that it has divine origin. There's nothing that we can read in it where we think there's no way this idea could have evolved were it not divinely put into this text. That's a criticism that perhaps Professor Dawkins made in the past.
Well, I think it's reflective of some order that's so profound and implicit that there isn't a better way of describing it than divine. But I don't really care if we look at that from the bottom up, like as a biological phenomenon, or as from the top down. I don't think it makes any difference.
It doesn't make a difference whether it was divinely inspired or whether it evolved within human.
I don't think fundamental. Look, so let me ask you this. Like, I think that at bottom, truth is unified. And what that's going to mean eventually is that the world of value and the world of fact coincide in some manner that we don't yet understand. And I think that union, the fact of that union, and the fact of that union is equivalent to what's being described as divine order across millennia. There's no difference. Now, and this is a tricky business, because you either believe that the world of truth is unified in the final analysis, or you don't. Those are the options. And if it's not unified, then there's a disunity. There's a contradiction between value and fact, or there's a contradiction between different sets of values, and they can't be brought into unity. I don't believe that.
Well, let's go back to what you said earlier, which I was very interested in. You implied there's no difference between whether the text is divinely inspired or whether it evolved in progression during a series of manuscripts, presumably. Now, I think that's genuinely interesting, but it's a huge difference. It's not the same thing. I mean, either it was divinely inspired or it wasn't.
Well, it's the same thing if it's fundamentally reflective of and accurately reflective of the implicit logos or order. And I think it is. Like, let me explain that a moment. Like, it took me a long time to understand the concept of sacrifice in the biblical text, because it seems so anachronistic and so primitive, and primitive and not understandable. What are these people doing, offering, choice cuts of meat to a God that lives in the sky?
Something disgusting about it.
Well, it's very easy to satirize. But when you start to understand that perception itself is sacrificial in its nature, and you start to understand that there's no difference between work and sacrifice, that they're the same thing, and you understand that community is predicated on sacrifice, then the emphasis in the text on sacrifice starts to become something quite marked and remarkable, especially because it's implicit. It isn't obvious at all that the authors of the texts and the editors who sequenced them actually understood what it was that they were highlighting. So with regards to the community, why is the community predicated on sacrifice? Because it's not about you, the community. Every step you take towards the communitarian means that you sacrifice something that's local to what you want here and now, right now.
I think
you have to give something up.
You're wandering onto something else now, which is something quite different. The notion of sacrifice, as you say, it goes right through the Old Testament and the New Testament. The sacrifice of Isaac or Ishmael by Abraham and the sacrifice of Jesus is the same idea. I think it's a very unpleasant idea, by the way. But what are you actually saying? Are you saying that Abraham did or did not sacrifice Isaac? Are you saying that Jesus really did die for our sins? I mean, do you believe that? Do you believe that as a fact, that Jesus died for our sins?
We have a big election coming up, and there's a lot at stake. But here's something to consider.
Do you not believe for a fact that Jesus died? Was crucified? Where is this Peanut the Squirrel owners are porn? Bryson tweeted about it. Where's Bryson? Bryson Gray. And Rachel posted something about it. Let's see if I can find it. Are people saying this is real? Yeah, I kind of agree with that commenter. I'm not quite sure how this is relevant, but also gross. But whatever.
Regardless of who's sitting in the White House, Miles, U.S. in the old
deeply under texts that I don't claim to understand. What my experience has been that the more deeply I look into these texts, the more I learn.
Richard Dawkins must really hate barbecues. Dude, Richard Dawkins must hate his life.
That doesn't mean that I can proclaim full knowledge of what the texts proclaim.
Okay, we have an interesting main story segment tomorrow on the show. So it's final closing arguments before the election. Then it's mini brains, lab-grown mini brains controlling butterflies in virtual reality. Yes, that's a true story that we're going to talk about tomorrow. Then we're going to cover this Peanuts the Squirrel garbage that I really don't care about, but we're gonna talk about it in main story news tomorrow. It should have been rapid fire, but I don't have a lot of content for tomorrow, so we're scraping the bottom of the barrel. You know, we're gonna do 24 hours of election politics the following day, so I don't want to dwell on that stuff too much. We are gonna show Trump taking out the trash, memes, reels, rapid fire. I don't think I have any reels for this week.
But I don't think, and I'm not trying to play a trick here. You know, I watched.
That's because they're closer to the equator, Dean. That's Arizona and I believe Hawaii. They're closer to the equator, so the time change isn't as noticeably different. As you get farther from the equator, the time change is more drastic. They do it to save power with streetlights, and yeah, the light cycles change naturally if you just watch so like when I first started my job, when I would leave work at 7 a.m., it would be light outside. And then without a time change, as it gets closer to when they change the time, it gets darker and darker and darker and darker when I leave. And so they change the time so that people's waking hours, how you set your clocks, how you set your alarms, how you set your timers on your street light, when people are most likely to be shopping. They change the time so that all that seems more natural. And I think it's a good thing. It's good for the economy. I know a lot of people are haters on daylight savings time because it's a minor inconvenience when they have to change their clock. But if we didn't do daylight savings time over time, eventually everything would be all screwed up. It'd be like daylight at midnight.
An interview that you did recently where you were talking, I think it was with Piers Morgan, yeah, about
There's a much more deeper explanation of that, but I've already did it in a stream that you were in the chat for, Dean. Maybe pay attention instead of just dilly-dallying in the chat. I'm just kidding. But yeah, I talked about this for like an hour a year ago, and I don't have my folder open on it.
About the complexities of trying to understand this strange realm of quantum phenomena, right? And we have a trouble with quantum phenomena because at the micro level, things don't act like things act at the macro level. So they escape our intuitions. And one of the things you said was that although it's perhaps even impossible for creatures embodied like us to get a grip on quantum phenomena, the strange wave-particle duality, for example, we have ample evidence that it works and stellarly. And I would say exactly the same thing about the biblical texts. Is that they run into a mystery, like there's a horizon of mystery, which I do not claim to penetrate. But insofar as I've been able to understand the text, every time I make a improvement in understanding, it reveals something to me that's just like shattering.
Quantum physics is deeply mysterious, and you're saying that biblical texts are deeply mysterious. The difference is quantum physics, the predictions you derive from quantum physics
to my
are fulfilled to the umpteenth decimal place. The umpteenth decimal place, I mean, I think it was Richard Feynman says, equivalent to predicting the width of North America to the nearest hair's breadth. Now, that's impressive. That's
no doubt.
The mystery there, as it were, gains its credentials by its predictions. The mysteries of the Bible don't have any credentials at all, as far as I can make out.
Well, I guess the credentials that I would put... You made a statement a couple of months ago that I found very interesting. And I don't claim to understand it, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot with it. You said that you were a cultural Christian. Okay, and so that raised a number of questions in my mind. You know, and the first question was...
You are changing the subject.
No, I'm not. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I may be leaping outside of the topic a bit to get back to it.
We can do cultural Christianity, but I think I have a list of questions that you wanted to ask, and that is one of them. But I think Professor Dawkins did ask you...
You were referring to the predictive power and to the utility of the stories.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's actually what I was trying to zero in on. Okay, so that was the point. Well, it seemed to me that your proclamation that you were a cultural Christian was a recognition and a statement that you had found something in the culture that had been derived from Christianity that you had an affinity with, and that there's some reason for that. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, well, what do you think that Christianity got right that allows you to make a statement like that? I mean, I know that there's differences perhaps in what we both think about the ultimate veracity of the biblical stories. Maybe there isn't differences. Like, it would take a lot of conversation to figure this out. But what did you mean by that? Like, what do you think that Christianity got right that would enable you to make a statement like that?
Virtually nothing. I meant by that no more than that I'm brought up in a Christian culture. I went to Christian schools. I therefore know my way around the Bible. I know my way around the Book of Common Prayer. I know the hymns. That's all. I don't value Christianity as a truth system at all.
Okay, so let me ask you about that, because maybe that's true and perhaps it's not. So the first question is, like, do you think that there are any marked differences between cultural traditions that would enable you to rank order them in terms of their ethical validity?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so for example, we could contrast mainstream UK Christianity with Islamic fundamentalism.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a hierarchy.
There is a hierarchy.
Okay, a hierarchy that points to what?
Well, in the case of Islam, I dislike any religion which punishes apostasy with death, that throws gay people off high buildings, that practices clitoridectomy. That seems to me to place Islam.
Clitoridectomy. Clitoridectomy. That's well, he's talking about the Muslims when they remove the clitoris from women so that they can't feel sexual pleasure. They'll lob the same accusations at Christians who do circumcisions and say that we mutilate young people's body parts in the name of Christianity. I think that's for cleanliness. You don't want no dang schmegma. But anyway.
On a lower level than Christianity, but that's not to say anything very positive about Christianity.
Well, it might be to say something positive about Christianity. Like, I think that question is open, because you might ask yourself, what did Christianity get right that led it away from those particular presumptions and towards something that you regard as more ethically appropriate? Like, this isn't a trivial question.
It's a very modest claim. It is not very much. I mean, to be better than a religion that throws gay people off high buildings is not really a very virtuous achievement.
I don't know. I don't know if that's true, because if you look at the barbarism that characterizes the human past, you might think that any progression whatsoever towards something approximating mercy and tolerance is nothing short of a bloody miracle.
Well,
like, people are pretty ruthless, and so are our chimpanzee cousins.
Yes, they are.
Right. So we move forward into the light with great difficulty, and the fact that we can take that for granted now, and that it seems self-evident and deserving of faint praise, it's not so clear to me that that's a reasonable proposition.
Okay, let's grant the faint praise, but that has nothing to do with the truth value, and what I care about is the truth value. I see no truth value in the claims of Christianity, the virgin birth, the resurrection, the miracles. Do you believe in any of those? Do you believe Jesus was born a virgin?
What do you mean by believe in is what he's going to say.
As I said before, there are elements of the text that I don't feel qualified to comment on. My experience has been that the more, like I know from a metaphorical perspective and from a mythic perspective what the story of the virgin birth means, and I accept that. I know, for example, that any culture that doesn't hold the image of the woman and infant sacred dies. And I don't know how that needs to be expressed in a form.
Is it true, though?
Do you mean that you don't know?
Well, let me ask you about that, because truth, this is something I talked with Sam Harris about too. Truth, as we know, is a tricky business. Do you think there are differences in the truth claims between different writers of fiction? Like, is Dostoevsky more profound than?
Well, I wouldn't call fiction truth claims anyway. I mean, these are...
Then on what grounds do we rank order the fiction in terms of quality? Like, Dostoevsky is a profound purveyor of fiction on the philosophical front, unbelievably deep and profound.
Yes,
There's something true about what he's writing about.
It's nothing to do with the truth that science is concerned with. The truth of science is the truth that gets us to the moon. I mean, this is nothing to do with whether one writer of fiction has a sort of insight into human nature. That goes without saying. I accept that.
Okay, so how do we deal with the notion that on the purely factual side, how do we deal with the idea, let's take you talked about clitoridectomy, let's talk about the oppression of women.
Yes.
We make a scientific case that that's inappropriate? Or is it a case that we're making on some other grounds? Like I see in the Judeo-Christian tradition, one of the earliest pronouncements is that both men and women carry the image of God, both. And that sets a certain tone to everything that follows. And it is a remarkable proclamation, given its radical age, that both men and women carry the image of God and are to be treated as something with intrinsic value outside of the domain of power and politics. And it isn't obvious to me, having thought about this a lot, how we deal with that in the pure realm of fact. Because one of the facts is, if I can oppress you, why the hell shouldn't I?
Yeah, my job is to keep things on track here. I think there are a number of questions which Professor Dawkins has asked quite directly that we still haven't really heard an answer for.
Okay.
Professor Dawkins asking about the virgin birth. You started talking about metaphor, you started talking about myth. I think anybody listening to this conversation will understand that maybe a society that doesn't believe in the virgin birth won't work. Maybe that's the predictive power that you're talking about. But I think you must understand that when Professor Dawkins is asking you, do you believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? He means something like a biological fact. And by the way, saying I don't know, or saying, I'm not qualified to comment, is an answer to that question. But is that your answer, that you don't know?
I said earlier, and I would hold to this, is that there are elements of the text that I don't know how to, that I'm incapable of fully accounting for. I can't account for what the fundamental reality and significance of the notion of the resurrection is. My knowledge just ends.
Sure, but
I know that whatever happened as a consequence of the origination and the promotion of the Christian story was powerful enough to bring Rome to its knees and demolish the pagan enterprise. So there's some power in that story that's remarkable.
Let's stick to the virgin birth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the virgin birth results from a mistranslation of Isaiah. You know that.
Like these sorts of questions.
Isaiah.
It's what would you say? They
Translation
don't
of
strike
Isaiah.
me as.
Shut up.
They're not getting to the
fulfillment
point.
of a
I know
It has a
think
purpose.
that.
Yeah.
Well, and look, I understand that there's perfect reasons to debate this. I know that, and I know that your question is more than valid. But it's beside the issue as far as I'm concerned, and it's partly because, well, when we started this conversation,
Okay, I don't have anything planned for a last segment tomorrow. I was gonna wait till after the election to do the 9 philosophical razors, but I think I can do it tomorrow because. Oh yeah, this is interesting too. We'll put this in rapid fire. I'll listen to some videos tonight, but really all I have to do is just go through them and read each one and then give my thoughts on each one. I think we'll do the philosophical razors show tomorrow. Disturbance likely to become a hurricane. We got a hurricane coming again. Christmas cane. NBC stations file notices of free airtime given to Kamala Harris for Saturday Night Live candidate. Oh, that's campaign meddling. She didn't have to pay for that airtime. What the? We'll check in on this hurricane. And then that will be it for reels and rapid fire. And then we just do the philosophical razors for the. Why is it so important for atheists if you believe in miracles or whatever? Virgin births can happen in nature, by the way. I think I have heard. Well, in nature, are you talking about animals that what's it called? Where they like what's the word? Are you talking about animals that have babies without a mate? I don't think it's ever happened with humans, but there are animals that can have babies without a mate. If that's what you're saying, you are correct. And atheists do believe in miracles. Most atheists will openly say, "Give me one miracle and I can explain the whole universe," because the miracle they need is why something came from nothing, why we have a universe that came from nothing. They'll appeal to miracles and metaphysical things when it suits them. And then they'll deny it. That's because there's no such thing as a smart atheist. There's an intelligent atheist, there's an educated atheist, but they're not smart. Smart is a combination of knowledge, intelligence, and wisdom. It's a combination of all three. You got to have some of all three, a lot of all three, to be smart. Atheist, not smart.
I said, for example, that it appears to be the case that a description of the structure through which we see the world is a story.
My camera blurry.
We see the world through a story. And so that's a remarkable thing. That's a remarkable discovery, and it's emerged probably in the last 60 years in multiple disciplines, because we have to prioritize our facts. And so we prioritize them according to a particular pattern. And there are patterns that seem to work and to propagate themselves properly and to orient cultures towards life abundant. And there are other patterns, the pattern of Cain, for example, that lead to absolute bloody devastation. And I don't know exactly how to construe that sort of truth. But we talked about the oppression of women, for example. It's like, how do you make a case on purely factual grounds that women should be treated as equals?
It's a moral question. And
I know, that's exactly.
And I was dealing with a factual question, which is, did Jesus have a father? And you won't answer it.
Well,
it's a different kind of question.
Father and a heavenly father, like almost all mythological heroes.
So he wasn't born of a virgin then? So you're saying that Jesus was not born of a virgin?
I said, first of all, that I don't know how to mediate the fact-value dichotomy in that case. I said the same thing about the resurrection.
It's not a value, it's a simple fact. I mean, did a man have intercourse with Mary and produce Jesus? That's a factual question. It's not a value question.
You must understand what you're being asked here, that even if you think that, say, the author of the...
Don't patronize Jordan. He understands what you're asking, but he's not giving the answer you want. And I think it's because he doesn't want to hurt his image and say, yes, I believe that this stuff was true. Because then these guys are going to be like, oh, well, he's an idiot. He's trying to explain it where the Christians will agree and the intellectual science, psychology, educated elites will also agree. He's trying to put it in words where everybody will agree, which sometimes that ain't the way to go. Sometimes you got to pick a side. Oil and water don't mix. You can't say these things to make everybody happy. You're going to piss some people off. You got to take a stance, Jordan. He's getting there.
Texts intended much more significance than a simple scientific analysis of events. Professor Dawkins is interested in scientific truth. That's the kind of truth that he's interested in. And even if you think it's irrelevant to the point of what the gospel authors were getting at, that first needs to be clarified before you can then begin actually uncovering what the stories are about.
What up, Elder
Professor Dawkins is
Lion
asking from a
and,
scientific perspective. And maybe you think...
Marcelo Serravalle. I think that was the first time I've seen you here, Marcelo. Elder Lion, what up? I seen you around.
that scientific approach is wrong. But if you just take...
We're not going to be able to watch all of this. I have to go soon. The precondition for resurrection of the bronze serpent, the divine and mundane, the biological reality of dragons. This part's pretty cool. We're going to skip ahead to this. And dragons did exist.
Richard asked you before about the difference between a story or an idea naturally evolving over the course of numerous manuscripts and throughout human history, and the idea of it being divinely inspired. And you were seeming to imply that these are almost interchangeable concepts. Now, if that's the case, when you say that this divine spirit behind the Bible is actually just the way that it has evolved throughout the human history, throughout the different manuscripts that we've had, then saying that that is what divinity is, I think for you may drag the mundane up into the realm of divinity. But I think for people like Richard and for many people listening, what it does instead is drags the divine down to the realm of the mundane.
Very well put, yes.
When we think about wildly successful businesses, we often focus on their great products, cool branding, and brilliant people. And of how it's neat through up of your selling.
Like the straight and narrow path of harmony between multiple modes of being. I don't think it doesn't make any difference to me whether it's the material reaching upward or the divine descending downward. I don't think there's any difference between those two things.
You don't. That's exactly right. That's the problem.
Well,
You don't see the difference.
Well, look at it this way. So, for example, in this conversation, you know this to be the case. Like, there's various ways that this conversation could go sideways, right? Seriously. Like, either of us could try to win. Either of us could try to demonstrate our intellectual superiority, right? Each of us could misrepresent the other. Or we could both try, and I do think we are in fact trying that, and I think Alex is helping along with that just fine. We could try to follow the thread of the exploratory truth and see if we could get somewhere. Now, I don't think there is any difference between that, by the way, and what's expressed in the biblical text as the spirit of the Logos. That's why we have dialogue.
I'm very interested in the possibility that truths emerge through evolving manuscripts. Now, that's a very interesting idea. And it's totally different from divine inspiration. And I want to pursue it because I don't believe in divine inspiration, but I would be prepared to believe in evolving manuscripts.
Well, I would say this is why I had set forward the possibility of taking a look particularly at Mircea Eliade, because that's where you'd find the best work. He's brilliant. I believe that if you studied the history of religious ideas, it's a 3-volume manuscript, or the Sacred and the Profane, which is probably his single best work, that you'd see profound analogies between the manner in which you've been construing the world biologically, including the trains of thought that led you to the development of the idea of the meme. I really believe that.
Well, analogies is one thing, but is it the same thing?
I think it's the same. I do. I think, look, I don't know. That's why I'd like your opinion on it.
Calm down,
well, seriously,
Jordan.
like, it's a complicated question. I've talked to...
No.
It's a complicated question. Most people don't know both.
This is Chad Peterson getting aggressive with Dawkins, and Dawkins is, oh, please no, Jordan.
Both literatures. There's not a lot of people to discuss this sort of thing with. Camille Paglia, I talked to Camille Paglia about this. She studied the work of a man named Erich Neumann. Neumann wrote a book called Origins and History of Consciousness, which is a work of genius, and also another book called The Great Mother, which is a study of the symbolism of the feminine. It's a great book. Paglia told...
Yeah, someone said God would never provide evidence of his existence to an atheist because he's already provided enough evidence. I'm not saying it as elegantly as whoever originally said it put it, but the idea is God's not going to try to prove himself to an atheist because if you just look around, it's already been proven. So if they just deny everything in reality, then meow, meow, meow. If they just deny everything in reality, then they're already ignorant, and there's no point in trying to prove more to them.
Told me that she believed that if the Academy would have turned to Erich Neumann, who's a student of Jung, although the greatest student of Jung, and maybe one who surpassed him, that the entire culture war that's torn the universities apart wouldn't have happened. People don't know this literature. And let me give you an example of this. You tell me what you think about this. Okay, so I spent a fair bit of time studying the psychophysiology of the hypothalamus. Okay, so the hypothalamus is set up, it's got 2 halves, basically. One half deals with fundamental motivated states, hunger, thirst, defensive aggression, sexuality, and so forth. And when those areas are dominated, the biologically relevant goal is activated and perceptions are oriented towards that goal. Okay, so now then you might ask yourself, well, what happens if all those biologically motivated states are satiated? And the answer seems to be is that the other half of the hypothalamus kicks in and it mediates exploratory behavior. And so the default structure of the mammalian nervous system is, if satiated or in doubt, explore and gather new information. There's no difference between that and hero mythology. They are the same thing. They're the same thing. The dragon fight, for example, which is the oldest story we have. It's coded in the Mesopotamian mythology. The dragon fight story is explore the dangerous unknown, discover the treasure that revitalizes the community. There's no difference between that and the science that you practice. They're the same thing.
What do you think of that,
It's the same story.
I don't know what to make of that. I mean, you say they're the same story. You've analogized the dragon fight to
Well, how many
fighting
dragons have you
Satan.
overcome in your life?
I'm not interested in dragons. I'm interested in reality.
Okay, so I read a book a while back that described the biological reality of the dragon. Say, well, there's no such thing as a dragon. It's like, okay, is there such a thing as a predator?
Of course.
Well, that's a meta category. What's the category of predator? Bear, eagle, if you're a primate. Fire? Is fire a predator?
No.
Well, it's complicated because a fire kills you. Okay, so is there a worse predator than serpentine, flying, fire-breathing reptile? Is that not the imagistic equivalent of predator? So in what way, if predator is real, in what way isn't dragon real? It doesn't take that much imagination to see the identity. And then wouldn't the fundamental task of edible primates be to figure out how to overcome the dragon forever?
I don't know why you say dragon. I mean, we have lions, we have tigers, we have saber-toothed, we have
Why not
tyrannosaurs
abstract?
out there.
Right, but why not abstract? Because it's for the same reason that we have the term predator. Like we have the term bear, lion, Komodo dragon. Well, you make an amalgamation, you say, well, the relevant set of features is an image. Well, what's the image? Predator as such. What's the image of that? The dragon that never disappears. And then there's a twist on that, which is so cool. It's so interesting because you can imagine rabbit mythology, which would be something like predator appears, freeze. But that's not the human story. The human story is predator appears, there's a treasure somewhere. Right? That's a completely different pathway of evolutionary significance. Like the way that we construe the world isn't freeze like predator. It's like, oh, there's a predator. Maybe there's something valuable lurking in our conflict with it. You know, our sticks and our spears that enable our fragile bodies to stand up against the dragons of the world.
So a dragon is a pictorial representation of the abstracted concept of a predator.
Yes.
As you say, we already have the term predator. And so it might be useful in art, in narrative, you can't paint an abstraction.
We had the image way before we had the word.
Sure, okay.
But that's a seriously important thing to understand.
But now we have the word. We have the word predator. And maybe if we were doing art, maybe if we were all going to sort of draw a picture or tell a story, and we wanted to invent a story to give our children a good moral message, we might invent this dragon or use this dragon as...
Well, we do, always. We do it continually.
Exactly, we do.
We do it with Harry Potter. We do it with The Lord of the Rings. We do it with the Avengers.
But when you say...
There's no escaping from it.
But when you say the biology of a dragon, you must understand how that can be misleading as to the enterprise that you're engaging in, because we're talking here about narrative, we're talking here about art, we're talking here about representations in literature.
I don't think the category of dragon is any less...
It's just a freaking dinosaur. It's just a big alligator with wings that can breathe fire. It's not that crazy biologically that could have happened. Especially if you believe in evolution, then it should not be far-fetched at all to believe in dragons. We have examples of creatures that can excrete fire, the bombardier beetle, for example. And if they think dinosaurs became chickens and that raptors were birds, then why couldn't there be a fire-breathing winged dragon reptile bird beast thing? Now, I think they were a totally different species of animal that either was sent down to Agartha to guard Sheol, or they just went extinct because maybe they were here as like a nemesis to men, kind of like the giants, and they just went extinct. But if you believe in evolution, it shouldn't be far-fetched at all to think that there were real dragons and that they just evolved to not have the wings and not breathe the fire anymore because it wasn't necessary, and now they're just freaking alligators.
It's valid than the category of lion.
Any less biological?
Well, it depends on your level of analysis. We have the term predator, which implies that all predators have something in common, because otherwise we wouldn't have the term. It's like there's no reason to assume ontological priority for the category of lion over the category of predator. Mm-hmm. Like it depends on, all that would determine which of those terms should be used is the purpose towards which the conceptualization is being directed. And if you want to identify a particular class of predator, well, then lion is a good term.
You would say that lions are an instantiation of this bracket term of predator.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would also say...
Would you therefore say that a lion is an instantiation of the bracket term of dragon?
Yes. Yes, because, because we're not only fact-oriented creatures, right? It actually matters to us whether we get eaten. Like it's one thing to lay out the nomenclature of the animal kingdom, but it's another thing to remember that predators can eat you. And then it's another thing, and this is very interesting, and it's relevant to that story of the bronze serpent. It's like, what do we want to teach our children? Well, to identify predators, obviously. Well, what do we want to teach them more profoundly? what attitude they should take towards the eternal fact of the predator. And the attitude they should take is something like the courage to voluntarily.
Damn, Jordan's being a predator right now. He's preying on these atheists. Dang.
Confront and not to.
Okay, we can't watch all of this. I gotta go. I gotta go to work. But I got the show ready tomorrow. Final thoughts on the election before the big 24-hour election day stream tomorrow night, Monday night, kicking the week off right. Dreaded Conservative Show. Be here or be square. 5 p.m. Pacific. It starts 8 p.m. Eastern time. Show starts. We'll talk about final things before the election, the closing arguments. We'll talk about floods in Spain. We'll debunk a abortion lie that they've been spreading. Did I say Peanut the squirrel? We'll talk about that mess, which I don't really care about, but it's popular right now. And what's the other thing? Oh, yeah, the mini brains, lab-grown mini brains, and the 9 philosophical razors. So we're going to be jumping around to science, pop culturally news, politics news, philosophy. We're going to be jumping around to a lot of crazy stuff tomorrow night. So be here for the show. I've got to go. I'm going to redirect you guys to Buff's stream. So hang out for 1 second so that we can get the raid. When you get in there, say, JS Raid. JS Raid. Don't leave and go there now. I'm assuming he's still streaming. Maybe he's not. Oh, yeah, there it is. There you go. All right. I'll see you guys later. Go say hi to Buff. Tell him Urbanites in the chat. Thanks for hanging out, guys. Tomorrow night, don't miss the show. We'll be back.